Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships. Welcome to Relationships Inside Out. Today we're going to be talking about the all-requested anxiety. What it is, what to do with it.
I don't know. I experience it, so I don't know what should we do.
Okay. One thing that should be said is just about every human experiences anxiety. Every human experiences anxiety. A functional level of it is how we have motivation, right? We think of it on like a bell curve. Too little, not functional, too much, not functional. But at that peak, that's when we have like optimal performance, we're motivated, but it's finding what is that peak for you on the bell curve.
Yeah. And I think you're hitting on what's really key is we all have anxiety, but how much does it impact your ability to function? Does it consume you? And we're talking about being restless, worrying too much and not being able to stop it, worrying too much about different things.
Distracted.
Yeah. Distracted. Yeah, exactly. So
it inhibits choices you make because you're too afraid or nervous or worried.
Can't sleep. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things we can kind of capture it, but does it impact your ability to function is really the key. And we all experience it. I experience it. I would identify as an anxious person.
Me too.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because a lot of therapists, like we coach on this all the time, right? But we even have our own anxiety. This is where that human quality to therapy comes in. Of these are the tools that work for me, work for my loved ones, work for other clients. And we all go through it.
Yeah. And we could experience anxiety on an individual level and it bleed into our relationships, but we can also have anxiety about relationships, right? So I think about, and it shows up different ways. One is I'm anxious that I don't want anything bad to happen because I'm afraid of fighting. So I don't want to express my opinion. The other is I'm anxious that this person's going to leave. So I pursue them by checking phones, calling them all the time, things like that, right? I mean, it can show up in different ways.
I'm anxious I'm not good enough. So I've got to be constantly working out. I've got to be on top of my game with everything. Otherwise they might leave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And anxiety in relationships is normal, right? I mean, this is, especially if you care about the person, there's a value of, or not, I mean, they're valuable enough that we're afraid to lose it.
And there's a value in that, right?
Yeah.
It keeps us from getting complacent in our relationship. We talk about this all the time of you have to keep dating your partner, even after you're married, all of that.
Oh, it's so much work.
I know. But we have to, right? Or the relationship can be stale. It can be complacent. Like it doesn't help the relationship any. So having some limited amount of anxiety about like, am I doing my job in my relationship? Am I providing that kind of thing can be actually kind of helpful.
Yeah. And it goes by the idea, it goes back to what you were talking about, that there is a very productive level of anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. And in relationships, that is, I want to continue to, but when it comes to a point where I'm afraid so much of them leaving, that my actual anxious behaviors of maybe pursuing too much, calling them all the time, checking or ruminating or over analyzing their behaviors to kind of confirm my own bias or fear that they might be leaving, like that is impairing your ability to function in a relationship. That would be too much. That's consuming.
One symptom that I hear a lot of people talk about is guilt. I feel guilty if I'm worried that I'm not giving enough, that if I set a boundary, I'm going to hurt them. So I feel guilty. And then I'm anxious about the guilt. I hear about it all the time.
Yeah.
Whether it's with our kids, with our loved ones. But the anxiety leads to, I don't know what to do to soothe this. And I feel bad. And, it's just kind of the spiral that happens.
Yeah. Again, normal. But ask yourself, does it impair my ability to function? Can I not concentrate? Right?
Functional anxiety is normal. When it gets really high, you don't have to live with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we think I just have to muscle through it.
Right.
Or the opposite would be, well, then I have to go on medication. Hear me when I say this, not everyone has to go on medication. Medication is often I think of a cast for a broken bone. It is a helpful means to the end. It might give us greater threshold to process what's causing the anxiety, to learn some tools from the anxiety, but certainly not everyone has to take it. And it's not meant to be a lifelong thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how you said it could just increase our threshold to process it. And some of the research does talk about medication and therapy together for like depression, anxiety is more effective than either alone, but not everyone needs medication. And I look at, and some people, you might need it for a while and that's okay too. But I also look at it like, what skills are you learning that are going to be long lasting?
Yes.
Because once you come off the medication, like if you haven't processed or learned anything to help manage it effectively, then the medication is really just kind of managing the symptoms.
And you might have to go back on it. I have clients who say, well, I'm afraid I'm going to come off because I might have to go back on it. And you might.
Yeah.
Seasons of life, whether it's birth of a child, death of a loved one, anything, finances, might elicit more anxiety, more stress within our body. And thus it is a tool that you can use at different stages, but it doesn't have to be for the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly. And going to a therapist could help learn these skills. You can actually pick up a workbook that goes through this stuff, but there's so many ways to handle anxiety. What are some ways for you, Kim, that you like to work through with your clients?
One of my big go-tos is mindfulness.
Oh yeah.
Mindfulness is core of my practice. Greg and I have actually kind of compiled a list of mindfulness strategies together. So things like deep breathing or progressive muscle relaxation and true deep breathing. That's a whole nother podcast in of itself of how do we properly deep breathe?
Yeah.
Not what America thinks deep breathing actually looks like. But noticing our five senses, grounding, all kinds of tools. And if anyone has a question of what these tools look like, please message us. I'm happy to clarify. But I love mindfulness. I talk to people about mindfulness is a focus on the present. Anxiety is a worry or focus on the future. Depression is a worry or focus on the past. We can't be both present-minded and anxious and depressed.
Yeah.
It takes us out of that state. And so we're just focusing on our current body, our current feelings, the chair I'm sitting in. And thus that cannot live at the same time as the anxiety. So if we can bring that in when we feel anxiety cranking up, it allows us to recalibrate, soothe our nervous system, and slow that process back down. So we don't have to spiral to some intense level.
And I tend to like the mindfulness activities that have you actively distract your thoughts and focus on the present. Sometimes if you're very anxious, like, I mean, I identify as anxious. And so when I'm doing mindfulness, my mind will wander. Right. I mean, the essence of mindfulness is catching that and recognizing it without judgment, bringing it back.
Yeah.
But I like the activities like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like focus on your senses. It keeps you kind of active in the presence, in the present time. So I love that stuff because it helps with anxiety, I think, a little bit more because we're really trying to interrupt those intrusive thoughts. So,
and that spiral. I love that you were just talking about kind of interrupting it and pausing it. Sometimes taking deep breaths can be really distracting. And you said like gently bringing your mind back. That's a big piece is you will get distracted, especially as you're starting out this practice.
You're human.
You will. So I tell people like, picture your thought passing by on a cloud or down a river on a leaf. Notice your thought, honor it, acknowledge it, and then let it pass on by and go back to focusing on your five senses or breath or movement or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I love that. And kind of with the idea of the thoughts itself, I love cognitive behavioral therapy and going back to what we talked about in a previous episode, kind of the thought log, right? Conditioning adaptive responses to interrupt what our mind is naturally wanting to do.
Okay, so let's break that down because that was a lot of like clinical sciencey speech.
Wait, what?
First, what is CBT? We talk about it because it's so it should be
cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah,
right.
It's common.
Yeah. So in the sense of if we're talking about the thought side, the cognitive side of this, this is where we're trying to learn ways to interrupt our intrusive thoughts, which tend to be like, if I'm thinking of anxiety, like, what if I fail this test? Or, what if I'm not good enough? How do we interrupt
thoughts
those?
That we don't want that keep happening and keep coming in? I think disrupt us.
Yeah. And I think about it as your mind is really trying to protect you and try to predict what could go wrong and trying to use adaptive thinking to really put balance back in that perspective, right? I know episode or two ago, we talked about the thought log and really kind of writing this out, right? What's the situation? What are my thoughts about it? What are my emotions that come from those initial thoughts that are really intrusive, right? Like I'm not good enough. Okay, I'm anxious. And then writing down potential other ways to perceive this. You know what? I don't know if I'm going to fail, or I've been worried like this in the past and I've actually succeeded. There hasn't really been evidence for me that I'm going to not be good enough or whatever it might be, right?
I think of a common example I see in couples, especially ones that are already going through turmoil. I text my partner, they don't respond. Thought might be, oh great, they're to our last episode, they're cheating on me or they're ignoring me. That is that kind of intrusive thought. I'm starting to feel anxious, fearful, worried, mad. That's that emotion that's with it. And the adaptive thought could be, maybe they're busy. Maybe they haven't seen it. Maybe their phone's dead.
Yeah.
Kind of rationalizing what else could be there rather than just catastrophizing what what we think could be happening.
Or mind reading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I like that you bring it to the couple relationship. One that I typically see, especially if you have a partner, or you're with a partner that tends to shut down really quick.
Mm-hmm.
And one anxious thought that would come up that's intrusive is they're leaving.
Or they don't care.
They don't care.
They're not listening.
Yep. Yeah. I'm not worthy enough to be listened to.
Mm-hmm.
And replacing that with adaptive thought of they're overwhelmed, they're flooded, like physiologically flooded, or they have their own stress going on, like depersonalizing it, right?
Even as you say that, like, I think about the like relief that can come in when we take the time to do that process, rather than being wound and God, they don't care about me, what an asshole, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Talk about eliciting empathy and soothing within our own bodies.
Yeah. And then kind of continuing. So cognitive behavioral therapy, that's the cognitive side that I typically like to work with. And then the behavioral piece is really this idea of systematic desensitization, another clinical term. This is the idea that as we systematically kind of re-expose ourselves, whether, in our thoughts or physically, we can kind of desensitize to whatever that trigger is that's causing anxiety. So I'll give an example. Like say somebody was in a car accident. They're very, very anxious about getting back in the car. So you systematically work to re-expose yourself to things. Maybe it's the thought of driving and sitting with that, right? Relaxing, learning how to cope with those emotions and be comfortable in it to where it's not as triggering.
Multi-step, not white knuckling through it.
Yeah, you don't kind of flood yourself and be like, oh, I'm driving, road trip next day. And some people can, and there's variations in how people manage this or respond to something that traumatic, right? I mean, for some clients, I have them like, just hold your keys. I just want you to hold your keys, or just sit in the driver's seat. Don't even turn the car on.
Just think about the car.
Depending where they're at. Yeah.
Look at a picture.
Yeah. And so it's really kind of, that's the behavioral piece of it too. Or somebody has social anxiety, right? Gradually exposing them in a very, let's just start with the thought of it and building up in a very safe, gradual way that's comfortable, but also not sitting there stagnant.
I love that you bring up two very different examples, because anxiety can come from everything and anything.
Yes.
It can be conditioned from your family, the way you grew up, triggers within that. It can be conditioned from a traumatic event, or it can be just daily stressors. Yeah. Parenting.
I would say that I think if you're going to do some exposure, you do that with a professional.
Absolutely. Good caveat there.
Don't try to do this yourself. I mean, there's more to it than that, but giving you an idea of like, it can be managed in different ways, right? We talk about mindfulness. Now there's a cognitive way of interrupting thoughts. There's even the behavioral way, but hopefully working with professionals to kind of get a better sense of these skills and practicing them to more proficiency.
And professionals that are skilled in that area and know what they're doing. Yeah.
Another one I really love is self-care.
What do you do for self-care? First, what is it? People hear that and they're like, oh, I don't know what that means.
Well, so I look at, we can have all the coping skills in the world, but if we don't take care of ourselves, then we might not have the capacity to use our coping skills effectively.
We can't pour from an empty cup.
So, yeah. And we've talked about self-care in previous episodes. It's really important. And it's the idea of doing things that rejuvenate you, right? What gets you rejuvenated? What makes you happy? And when you're doing those things that do that, you're almost, inadvertently present, which is what we want. And your mind's not on that stuff. So if you're going hiking, you're in the outdoors. It could be just taking a hot bath before you get to bed. It could be something simple. That could be crafting. Things that really just fill your cup.
And we have a whole episode on this. Yeah. So if you're thinking to yourself like, oh, I don't ever do that, or I don't know what that is, check that episode out, because self-care is probably one of the most foundational things we can do to treat anxiety or even depression or pretty much anything, right? If we're not taking care of ourselves, our ability to then take care of other people, to work, to sit in class, whatever it might be, is significantly decreased.
And I look at anxiety taking away our focus on self-care. I think it's one of the first things to go, because we're anxious about this project. Okay, well, myself can wait. Right. Or I'm anxious about this relationship. So until I figure this out, then I don't need to take a bath or go exercise or do anything like
meeting
that.
Other people's needs.
Well, hopefully take a bath, but I don't need to take a bath right now for the pleasure. Right. But
simple necessity. Yeah. Or parenting. I hear a ton of moms say, I feel guilty for leaving my kids. I feel anxious that they are going to be upset, that the other parent, the babysitter, is going to have to deal with them. Yeah. Thus, I'll just stay home. I'll forfeit what I need to just make sure everything else is kosher.
Yeah. One thing I do want to bring back is the idea of how anxiety shows up in a way of in unhealthy ways to cope.
Mm-hmm.
So I see this in people who become what we call obsessive compulsive, maybe cleaning, right? So when you're anxious, you feel out of control. So you do things in your life to get some sense of control, right? Making sure that, like, I've had some where they have to do rituals, right? Like, I'm anxious about how the day goes, the uncertainty.
Tapping, touching, turning in a certain pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if there's like something out of place in the house, I'm very anxious, right? And trying to really understand what is the meaning behind if that doesn't happen? What is the fear that will happen if that doesn't happen? Because we engage in these behaviors and from my perspective is a way to try to control, but they're not really helpful. Have you seen this with any of your clients?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It's again, back to mamas, right? Anxiety. I'm checking on my monitor every 2 minutes.
Yes.
I go in there to check their breathing every 5 minutes. I can't sleep because I'm so worried, whatever it might be. I hear it a ton, or I have to keep everything clean, or I restrict my food, or I have to work out a certain amount. And this is all to soothe that anxiety of my body isn't what it was. I'm not attractive. My partner's not going to love me.
Yeah.
Not a good parent, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And again, a lot of stuff is our normal thoughts. We have these things and anxiety can be healthy, but again, if it consumes you and you're not able to function, you're not able to think. Like I think about in the relationship, if you're so anxious, worried about leaving, again, you're forgetting about taking care of yourself.
You're actually probably going to push them away.
You're not going to work. You're calling in because you want to, check on the partner, see where they're at, follow their phone on your, what's that, tracking or something. I see that happen. Yeah.
Think about also, like I think about with anxiety, it often elicits a reaction. And so if I'm anxious, I might be irritable, short, controlling, demanding. And so if I'm not keeping my anxiety in check, and we all let our anxiety get away from us at points.
Not me, but go ahead.
I can attest that is not true. Keeping an eye on that, because when we aren't regulating, when we aren't doing the self-care, taking care of ourselves, that reactivity goes up. And so our fear of my partner is going to leave me, therefore I need to be controlling and cleaning, is actually going to push them away faster.
Yeah.
It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
So keeping an eye on that anxiety of how is this, not just internally, which that's a whole nother ball of wax of how it impacts your cardiovascular system, nervous system. Anyway, but how it impacts my relationships. If I'm an anxious parent, am I allowing for creative play, for spontaneity with my 4-year-old?
Yeah.
Or am I trying to control everything and stressed out and strung out? And then she's sitting there like, what is happening?
Absorbing that and learning how to respond to that. And if that's consistent, they're going to find a way to adapt.
And am I modeling?
And that's not always healthy, the way how they adapt, right?
Right. Am I modeling this unhealthy pattern or a healthy version? And as parents, you're going to do both, right? With our 4-year-old, and I think I've talked about this. She's gotten really attuned. She's a highly sensitive child or highly sensitive person. And we might have an episode on that at some point of what that looks like. But essentially, she feels really big. Her nervous system responds pretty quickly. If I'm anxious or stressed, she will come to me and say, Mom, are you stressed? Like she picks up on it right away. So that's my moment of, do I keep doing whatever I'm doing that's showing her that? Or do I say, honey, you're right. I'm going to go take a couple minutes to cool down. Or can I have a hug? Or do you want to take a bath with me?
And show that.
Show proper coping, right?
Yeah.
Or am I just going to be, no, I'm not stressed out. And then I'm not the parent I want to be anyway.
Yeah. And I like what you're talking about. One thing you really said that there are two things. One is the irritability. I think a lot of people, including myself, when, we got into this field was, wait, irritability is a product of anxiety?
It's uncomfortable. We don't like being anxious and we get pissy and our nervous system's responding. And yes.
But just being aware of that being a warning sign for anxiety is irritability, right? The other thing too, is you're talking about the child's response a little bit in this, and maybe the anxiety is not even directed towards the child. Like in any relationship, there are subtle ways that this impacts it. Like in a romantic relationship, maybe your anxiety isn't coming out, but you can't be present. And maybe you're not emotionally available because right now your mind is focused on the survival of this anxiety. Like, how do I manage this or whatever's going on? So if you're not present, right, then there's some disconnect.
Anxiety about my body image, therefore we don't have sex.
Yes.
And if I don't tell my partner that,
or performance,
right?
Anxiety about performance. Yeah.
If I don't tell my partner that, they're internalizing as I'm losing my partner. They don't love me. They don't find me attractive, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And that might actually elicit anxiety in the other partner that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it becomes a cycle. So I think it's important for your body assess how does anxiety come out? What does it look like for me? Does it look like wringing of my hands or sweaty palms or increased heart rate, my jaw feeling tight?
Stomach.
As soon as I notice those cues, one, you're already well into anxiety. It is taking that, like that physical cue already tells you you've been there for a minute. But as soon as I notice that physical cue, okay, this is my moment to reset. Don't try to muscle through it, white knuckle through it. Use it as an invitation of, okay, body, I feel you. I see that something's amiss. What do I need to do to reset?
Yeah. And I actually love having clients write this out, right? So what are the triggers? It could be random. Like just think about, when do you get anxious? You might not know it now, but just keep a
running list on your phone.
Yeah. Keep a running list. And then the next one is warning signs. And I love when we're able to kind of understand what you're talking about, physical, and it could be psychological. Like, what do I do psychologically? It could be the irritability, right? How do I know that now I'm triggered? Where do I feel it in my body? Like learning these warning signs, because then that will, like you said, invite you into using these coping skills. And I have them write down what coping skills you can use. They could be distraction techniques all the way to something that's a little more in depth, like the thought log or the adaptive thoughts that we talked about. And then also a list of self-care to be able to reflect back and be like, you know what, I haven't been doing this.
Yeah,
I haven't. And then also just when do you know you need to go talk to somebody when it gets too much? And often it's when my coping skills aren't working.
And I tell people, often we'll notice the behavioral cues faster than we're going to notice the emotion.
Yeah.
So if you're waiting for that moment of, I feel anxious, you're already way down the line.
Yeah.
We got to start with things like my feet ache. And it takes some attunement to our body. Or I'm feeling irritable or pissy or I'm clenching my fists. Those earliest signs are when we need to intervene, not waiting until a panic attack.
Or gastrointestinal issues, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Or feeling dread or intensive worry. That's our moment. Don't wait until that worry becomes so escalated that now I'm like picturing my husband running away with another woman and all the things simply because he didn't answer a text.
The rabbit hole.
Right.
Yeah. Interrupting those thoughts, whether you're doing it being present, whether you're challenging those thoughts. I mean, and earlier you mentioned progressive muscle relaxation. I love that for a couple of reasons. And you're being present, but you're also being present by doing exercises that elicit physiological stimuli.
For tactile.
Tactile. Yeah, that is actually more, it's easier to be present with, right?
You're not relying on your mind.
Thoughts, right? Yeah. Because your brain responds more to physical sensations more than emotional, right? That's kind of so then somebody squeezing real tight and then there's this discomfort. Now your mind's focused on that.
So a quick drive-by of PMR is you start at your toes, go up through your cranium and then out through your hands. And you clench little muscle groups at a time. So toes, then ankles, calves, quads, and all the way up, including your booty and including your pelvic floor, ladies.
And your face.
And every muscle. So we don't just clench our whole face. It's shutting my eyes. Okay, that's its own. Jaw, that's its own. But going from toes to cranium and then out through hands in these small groups and then ending with a whole body clench. Yeah. And you hold your muscles as tight as you can in each group for about the count of 5, maybe 10, and then let them release. Think like butter. Then you go to the next muscle group and allowing each of those muscles to tighten as much as they can, but also breathe and relax as much as they can. Yeah. And a lot of times people will do it right before bed and they don't even make it all the way through because it takes you away from your mind racing into that tactile body cue. That
physical sensations. Yeah. And there are videos all over YouTube on how to do this. There's different counts. There's people work from the head down to the toes. There's variations of this stuff and find something that works for you. I love it. You know, as my mind would wander, typically I like the things that are very tactile and then I can interrupt and forces me to be present. So,
and that's an important point, right? So from what I've seen, and I don't know the research on this, but a lot of men prefer the tactile, whereas women might prefer like visualization or imagery. And again, I don't know that there's any actual research. This is just a trend I've seen. Yeah. So for me, PMR is one that can be good sometimes, not my go-to, but imagery. So picturing myself on a beach or I picture my in-laws cabin and there was this grove of aspen trees near their cabin. And I picture myself standing there and I can hear the leaves and smell the air. And I take my 5 senses to this place, to this imagery.
This is calming me down. Continue.
Oh, I freaking love it. We just bought our 4-year-old.
Nice. Tell me about the color of the leaves.
Gold. Oof. Every time.
So fall, yeah.
But our 4-year-old, we just bought her by Little Renegades. They're called Imagine meditation cards for kids.
Mhm.
And it walks her through the same thing. So we do a breathing card, and then she picks out a picture.
Mhm.
And on the back of the picture is a guided meditation eliciting that picture.
Oh, I love
So
that.
there's like a beach scene, a stars, a stage. Anyway,
I love that.
but we use that as transition to bed because it calms her body down so she's
Mhm.
ready for rest. So we can use them throughout the day, but
Mhm.
also to prepare our body for rest, because rest is foundational.
Yeah.
And if we can prime our body for that rest, we can actually get quality rest, and probably we'll see a reduction in our anxiety simply because we're more rested.
Yeah. And actually some of the research around sleep talking about improving people's capacity to regulate emotions better, right? After a good rest. So yeah, I mean, anxiety is it's so invasive in all of our lives, and just making sure we're doing a good job of recognizing when it's too much, impacting our ability to function at work, in our relationships.
It's time to recalibrate.
Mhm.
And I realize I say this as I'm drinking a caffeinated tea.
Yeah.
But also for people who are really anxious, looking at your diet. If you have a lot of caffeine, maybe let's move away from the caffeine. Studies are showing that sugar can elicit an anxious response, especially in kids. Reduce the non-natural occurring sugar. So fruit, naturally occurring, doesn't tend to impact it. Things like processed food, chocolate, the things we all reach for when we're anxious and emotionally eating.
Am I supposed to do that?
Oh, it's brutal. It's brutal. I reach for chocolate. My husband reaches for chips.
I do both. So.
I love them together. I digress.
Oh, I don't know about together. Okay.
Sweet and salty?
Now I'm anxious. Let's go back to this. Let's go back to this grove that you were at in the cabin.
But looking at anxiety isn't just about pushing your mind to go somewhere different. It's a holistic approach.
Yeah.
Is there a health problem I've been ignoring that I need to attend to?
Yeah.
Is there something in my diet that needs to shift? Exercise. Okay. Some people dread this word. I don't love it either, but exercise is better than any psychotropic or mental health medication we can give someone for anxiety and depression. For most.
Yeah.
Build it in. Doesn't have to be intensive CrossFit or any of that. It can just be
P90X,
a walk.
Yeah.
It can be some weightlifting, something to get our cardiovascular system moving and endorphins firing.
Yoga for 10 minutes.
Yes.
Start simple, start small.
And they're free on YouTube.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything huge.
Yeah.
But move your body. So finding this holistic approach of what do I need to shift in my environment, in my body, in my diet, in my exercise, whatever, that could help reduce that anxiety.
Yeah.
Do I need more support? But with parents, do I need to bring people in? Do I need time away from my kids?
Yeah.
Do I need help with my house? Whatever it is. But really taking that holistic approach.
Yeah, I like the idea of advocating for support.
Yes.
Sometimes that is enough. Like, we're anxious about everything we have to do, dropping the kids off, right? Got to come back and do work, but I also have to make these phone calls. I still need to go pick up prescriptions or whatever it might be.
Clean the house.
Get support. Yeah. And I see this too when people are better at taking care of other people than themselves, is they're very anxious of everything they have to do because they have a hard time saying no. Right. So boundaries, again, I think this is probably every episode that we've talked about it, but even that can help with anxiety when you actually get a little bit more structure around your life, a little more control.
Do you have any suggestions for couples as they work through anxiety with that support in mind? Like, is there something you can do with your partner to help reduce that?
So the first thing I think is one, just being aware of how is it impacting your relationship.
Yeah.
And I think about it, we call the term very academic dyadic coping. It's how couples manage stress together, right? From Guy Bodeman. But the thing is everyone is going to manage this different. How do you provide support? But I think there needs to be a conversation of, what do you need in the times that you're anxious? How can you let me know that you're anxious so I know maybe not to bring up this topic of finances tonight?
Or to invite you to take self-care or rest or a break.
Yeah. Yeah. So good question you're asking, because I feel like we really have to understand what each partner is wanting or needing. And some people want to do it on themselves. Some people like the internal processors, people who need to take time away and just work it out in their own mind. But if it gets too much, right, what does that look like? How can the partner support you? What can they do? Do you want them to take over some tasks? But this is a very difficult dance. I like the word dance because it's going to go back and forth. There are going to be times in your life where you're more anxious than your partner, but how do I get my needs met and support from my partner but they also might be experiencing anxiety and need support from me.
Mhm.
Right. And this might be a time to go get support external to that, like a therapist or maybe a family member to help out with the kids or something like that. So you guys can have some focused time together. But I really think that conversation about what does support look like for you and what works for you.
For you, not for your partner.
Yeah.
Such a distinct difference here.
Kind of like love languages, support languages.
Mhm.
I like just to be held, maybe someone could say, right? Or I love it when you actually take these tasks over and I can come home and not have to think about them.
Mhm. My hubby and I use the word punting.
Yeah.
If
yeah.
And I think I've mentioned this before. Like if one of us is feeling anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, I punt to my partner. Yeah. But it's also, if I notice my partner is getting worked up and he's not catching it, being able to say, "Hun, do you need a break?
Yeah.
Hey, do you want to go upstairs and take a 5-minute?
Yeah.
Do you want to go outside? Hey, I've got the girls. Why don't you go get your shower by yourself or whatever?" Yeah. Invite that, because sometimes the external party, the other person, is going to notice it before we're noticing it.
Yeah. And I love that you bring out, it could be just a simple question, just like you're talking about. It could be, what's going on for you?
Yeah.
I'm picking up a little bit of stress. Like, is that, what's happening? Not, you look stressed.
I was just going to say,
oh my
delivery
God.
is everything. If you look at your partner and be like, you look really worn out.
You're anxious as fuck right now. You need to calm down.
Why are you so irritable? These yous and questioning, not helpful.
Blaming. Yeah.
So switch it up.
You are anxious. You need therapy. I've heard that before. Yeah.
Instead, turning to, I'm noticing, or,
yeah,
hey, would it be helpful if,
yeah,
or, hey, is there something I can do to support? Hey, I see you're making dinner. Why don't I take the girls outside?
Yeah.
Why don't I, whatever? Or you made dinner last night. Come sit down. I'll do dinner.
Yeah.
There are ways to support that don't have judgment laden in them. That's why we use the word punt, because there's no judgment in the punting.
Except for when you just punt back and forth, like I made fun of, brought up, or like the last time you brought that up, right? So.
There's one day, and I think I said on the last one, of where I woke up and my kids were unruly in the first 5 minutes, and I was like, I punt for the whole day. My husband was like, you can't do that. And I was like, well, I just did. But yes, loving and compassion, right? Having compassion for our partner who's anxious. At the core, remember, it's not a choice. We can choose what actions we take to mitigate it, to do something different, but anxiety itself is not a choice. No one chooses to feel anxious or to feel like shit.
Yeah. We can choose to make it worse by going down the rabbit hole.
Absolutely. We can choose to intervene and make it better.
Yeah.
But we don't choose to enter that state.
And more importantly, you're probably going to do both, because we're human and we're not perfect. And there's days that I'm not.
Except for me, Greg.
There's days that I'm not using my coping skills effectively. And there's days that I am. I mean, that's just part of the process. But I think more often than not, giving ourselves reprieve. So we're not constantly in this cycle of anxiety that sometimes is going to impair our ability to function.
And compassion for ourselves. There are times people talk about, like, I'm anxious about being anxious. And then we're really off to the races. Instead, take a breath and say, like, body, I'm feeling you right now.
Yeah.
What do I need? Doing that scan. Okay, body, I see that this is hard for you.
Yeah.
Talking to yourself. It sounds bad, but talking to yourself, coaching yourself, inviting yourself into a place of compassion or healing, rather than, okay, I can't feel this. I can't think this way. Yeah. It's bad. I am bad.
Yeah. And I like talking about exploring that, because if it's so uncomfortable, I mean, this is where you get sometimes substance use, right? Numbing yourself from it instead of dealing with it.
It shows up in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
Oof. But by and large, I'd say almost every client we see has some level of anxiety that they're working with.
Yeah. We are too.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I say that to normalize. We all go through it, and it looks different. It looks different in kids, adults.
Yeah. Any last minute, like, tips or things that
just to be kind to yourselves and the people around you. We've all got so much shit on our plate and things that are creating anxiety and stress. Try to smile at someone. Try to be compassionate. Try to be loving. Try to smile at yourself, rather than turning to what a jerk. Maybe think about, man, their anxiety is high. Elicit that empathy.
Yeah.
What about for you?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you said things that be going on. I was like, pandemic. I mean, this is something we're all sharing, right?
And we all might not be our best selves right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. We're human. We're going to experience this. Just try to be aware of where you feel it in your body. So that way that can be more of a flag for you in the future of, like, oh, I'm not feeling well, and know what coping skills work for you. Everything we talked about today can be like an a la carte right?
Yeah.
It's not a one size fits all, right?
And there's a million more tools we didn't even touch.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like as Kim mentioned earlier, if there's anything that you want in depth about in terms of certain skills or things like that, feel free to reach out to us.
Well, thanks for joining us on Relationships Inside Out, where we kind of demystify healthy relationships and give tools to help us all have healthy relationships with ourselves, our families, and our partners. If anyone has any questions, feedback, topic ideas, anything, don't hesitate to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. We look forward to that feedback and ideas. So we thank you. And until next time.
All right.